Hello and welcome to our next episode of CatSci podcast. Today we're here to talk about cat relationships, both those relationships that we have with our cats and those relationships that cats have with one another.
Hey everyone, welcome back. So the first thing that I want to ask you, Kristen, is, you had research come out recently on attachment in cats, and I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, so we actually did what's called a strange situation test with cats in our lab. And so, what we know from research, both with dogs and with the human children, is that when they're put into unfamiliar situations, it actually causes attachment behavior in those animals to be heightened, and it allows for us to measure that behavior. So, what we did was bring these cats into our lab and they were in the room with their owner for just about 2 minutes. And then the owner left the room for 2 minutes and then came back. And it's really how the cat reacts to when the owner returns that we're looking at for determining that attachment style. So, what we really see is that there's kind of three main ways that cats behave. We'll see that cats can behave in a secure fashion. So basically, when their owner comes back, they are no longer distressed that they left the room to begin with. And they go to their owner and basically just get attention and then go back to exploring the room. So, what we see is this contact exploration balance where the cat will go see the owner, go back to exploring, go see the owner, and again, isn't really showing any distress that they left. But we can also see insecure responses. So some cats will actually just cling to their owner when they return. So although that owner's come back and they shouldn't really be so distressed anymore, they're still just kind of clinging there on their lap and showing some signs that they haven't really calmed down from the owner leaving to begin with. And then we'll see this also in a third style, which is known as avoidant, where although before the owner left, the cat may have been going to the owner and exploring the room, when the owner comes back, they're just sitting away from them, avoiding them. And interestingly, the proportion of secure and insecure cats in the population was similar to what we see in the human and the dog population. So, 65% of both kittens and adult cats were securely attached to their owner. And this meant, again, that they showed that contact exploration balance, also known as the secure base effect. So, when their owner came back, they acted as a secure base from which they could go off and explore this new novel environment, but periodically go back to their owner and receive attention and reassurance versus insecure cats, which made up 35% of the population, they still are maybe persistently distressed that their owner left to begin with. And so they don't go back to exploring that room like they did before the owner left. Instead, they're either excessively clinging or excessively avoiding, but either way, they're not exploring the environment and they're not exploring the owner. So I'm curious, have you kind of noticed any of these secure, insecure behaviors in your own cats, maybe under times of stress or unfamiliar situations?
Yeah, it's really interesting that we see this in all animal species because cats get a bad rap of being so different from a bunch of other animals, when in reality they do show the same things. So one thing that I've noticed with specifically my cat Elliot is when we leave them, we put them in our bedroom just so they can't get into super amounts of trouble since they're still young. And he does not like being in there, and he has started to become a little bit destructive. And that's something that we see in a lot of dogs as well. Particularly our dog also has separation anxiety. And so she always has a sitter or someone with her. But it's really interesting to see his attachment style compared to, say, Peach, who is more confident with me leaving, and when I leave and come back, she's completely calm.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what do you think about Violet? Do you think that she's more insecure like Elliot or more secure like Peach?
I think she's somewhere in between. She is insecure when she's not with Elliot. Um, but I don't think she has that same issue when I'm not around, as long as she's with him. So
Yeah.
he kind of takes the lead on that behavior. However, I have been training them separately because they've gotten really distracted with seeing each other, hearing each other, even if they're just in crates in the room. And so I've been putting them in separate rooms, and they throw a huge fit when they're apart. And that I don't necessarily think is an attachment thing so much as it is I want to be doing what the other one is doing. But that's the only time I see her truly freak out and panic.
Interesting. We actually have a student right now that's looking at whether or not cats do form these attachments with one another, and if they do, whether or not these are the same behaviors we see them display toward their owner. And the project is still being conducted right now, but it does seem like there's a lot of different potential factors that could influence whether or not cats do form attachments with one another. And these could be things like how long the cats have lived together or whether or not they're siblings. And your two are siblings, correct?
Yeah, they're presumed to be siblings. They were found together and they're the same age. So if they're not siblings, they've been together probably in the same colony as they were growing up and kind of interacted with each other before I got them. And it's interesting to watch Peach because I can separate them from Peach, and Peach has no issues with them leaving, but God forbid you separate those two. And that was one of the determining factors of keeping them, because when they were in their foster home, the rescue organization Madison Cat Project that they came from, they give some handouts to the foster parents that go over how to determine whether or not the cats are bonded and have to be adopted out together. And one of the tests that they do is to separate that kitten from the one that they think is bonded to them for I can't remember if it's 45 minutes or an hour, and see what they do in between. So when I was temporarily keeping them, I tried it, and at first they were a little bit whiny between the two on either side, but it seemed more to be an issue that I left. So I would kind of bounce between each room where they were. I would play with one for a little bit, and then I would go do something in a separate room from either of them. And then I would go in with one of the other ones. And it seemed like if one of them was getting attention from me, it was more of a stressor to the other cat. Um, that being said, if I went back and did it again, it would be interesting to see if I just stayed out of both of their rooms and didn't bounce back, to see if that would have had an effect as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Huh, that's interesting. Did you record them while they were in their rooms so you could see, or were you just kind of peeping in?
I should have recorded
Yeah.
them. I didn't, but it would have been really interesting to see. I kept peeping in, and there were times where they were definitely trying to reach under doors and try to, interact with either me or, get to the other. And inevitably, we did end up keeping them. I think they are fairly bonded. Do I think that they could have gone out and acclimated without each other on their own? Probably, yeah. But it's interesting to see those relationships of how cats bond in that way and when they have to be adopted out together, because obviously that has to do with a welfare concern and kind of can sometimes complicate the adoption process for them too. So more research on that is definitely needed. So I'm super glad you're doing it.
Yeah, yeah. With my boys, because they were foster failures, we had the 3 of them that we had found on the side of the road, and then we, took them to a local humane society because we were like, "Oh, well, we can't keep them, but we wanna help them out, and we can keep them till they find a home." and we lost one of the kittens, and then the other two just got super bonded, because there had been three and now there's just two of them and all the attention's on both of them. And then it was like when time came, we wanted to keep one, but we couldn't choose which one to keep. And then
That's
it
what
was
we
like,
did.
yeah, it was like, well, I can't break them up. Like, all they do all day is play together, So
Sure.
we ended up keeping them. But their relationship together is so different from the other cats' relationships with one another. And granted, they're all adults now, and we're introduced to each other as adults. So it's a little different than, growing up in a litter together and always being around that other individual. But it is interesting just seeing how bonded they are because of the cats I've had. I think that they're the most bonded pair I've ever had.
It's interesting to see the dynamic between Peach, who's 2 years old when I introduced the kittens in, and their interactions with, Elliot and Peach's interactions, Violet and Peach's interactions, compared to Elliot and Violet's interactions. And what I tend to see is Elliot and Violet have a very interesting play style. They play much harder and more rough, I think, in some ways. Elliot kind of lays into Violet and he listens to when she kind of whines at him like it's too rough. And with dogs, litters play a huge factor in bite inhibition when they're learning to control their bite force. And as I watched them grow up from 12 weeks old to now 6 months, it was really interesting to see that when Elliot reached her pain tolerance limit, that she would squeak at him or whine at him and he would stop. And, we see in dog litters when they're singletons in a litter, that is something that they don't necessarily learn as well. And you have to really work with them more on it. And I wonder, you know, how we could apply the same knowledge to cats. I'm sure it has some sort of, analogous to them. But it's also interesting to watch Elliot and Peach play because they play pretty rough as well and they have a really good playing relationship. But Violet and Peach have a more reserved relationship with each other. All three of them still cuddle and sleep with each other, and they're all touching at least, I would say, 5 out of 7 days of the week. They're sleeping next to each other and touching each other, which is kind of unusual to bond so quickly, I think. But then when they're moving around, I feel like Peach and Violet can overstimulate each other as well. And some of it is trying to figure out how to play with each other, but not knowing how to do it well. And some of it is just sassiness between the two of them.
That's interesting what you say about learning to play because, with my cat Macy, she's blind, and so she can't see a lot of the play signals that the other cats are putting off. And so it's kind of been, we'll have to babysit Macy sometimes, like, okay, don't be too rough with her. She can't see you. And what will happen is, Kevin will be on his back, and it's very obvious that he's playing just kind of slow swatting. And then all she knows is that there's motion in front of her face. And so she gets freaked out and starts cuffing at him. And then he's all offended and he's like, well, I just wanted to play. So it's been interesting trying to kind of get those dynamics, in a healthy relationship. And one thing that helped with her is actually putting bells on the other cats because then she can hear them. And so it wasn't so much of a surprise when Carl's right in front of her. She should have been able to hear him coming and kind of prepare herself. So that has helped, but they still don't really play together. All the boys though will play together, the three of them, and they'll get a little rough too. And sometimes you'll hear in the other room growling or all these weird noises, but they're pretty good at kind of easing off once the other one starts letting them know that's a little too hard. So
It's so fun to watch them. Peach was a single cat for a couple years, and it was interesting to watch her play with us in different ways compared to her playing with Elliot. And I think it's really added to her life. Rob and I were just talking about that of, you know, we've pondered whether or not she likes the fact that we added them to the household, and I think she does. I think she gets a lot out of it. She gets different attention from us. Of course, she has to share that, which for her, we thought that might be a little rough because she is super attached to especially me. But now that we got the kittens, she's been spending more time with Rob and getting attention from both of us. And she's getting all of that play and that exercise from them and that dynamic. I love it. I love watching it's enriching for me, like we were talking about in the last podcast. It's enriching for me to watch them interact. I find it fascinating.
Oh, I'm on the same page. When the boys are playing or they're doing whatever, it's, like, so fun to watch them. So, it's definitely just, like, another entertainment outlet in the home, but
Absolutely.
so I think that a lot of people are kind of put off by the idea of having multi-cat households because there is this idea that cats don't really like company or aren't really going to benefit from social interaction. But I think that there is this revolution now to kind of really stop with the single cats unless it's an individual where that's really the benefit, because obviously we have personalities where they just want to be the only cat. That's that. But there are a lot of cats that I think would benefit from having a social partner. It can be hard to introduce two cats as an adult, especially if they have no prior relationship. So if you're already going out and getting a new cat, might as well just get two at once because you're probably going to want to get a second cat eventually anyway. Um, so if you're not going to adopt a pair of cats and you already have a cat in the home, there's a few things you can do to try to introduce those individuals to each other. And typically suggest that you basically shape up to them interacting. And at first, you can just keep them separated, but let them smell objects that the other cat has their scent on. So, this is known as scent swapping. So, basically, I'll take one toy from one cat and one toy or blanket from the other cat and swap them, and then create positive associations with those objects. So when they smell the toy, play with the toy so they can see that, hey, when I smell that, something good happens. You can put treats next to it or catnip. And then you can work up after doing some of those scent swapping sessions to them being able to physically see each other, but not being able to physically interact. So having something like a screen door or a gate between them. So again, they can have the sight of each other and the smell of each other, but not have any interaction. And typically, if you just kind of feed them or again play with them, that will help them to again associate that smell and sight of the other cat with good things happening. And then finally, after doing that, you could do a physical introduction, again, really paying attention to the cat's behavior, redirecting them if they look like they're getting maybe too aggressive or trying to pounce on the other kitty. But I think that people too often just get excited and want to put the cats all together and skip some of these steps that maybe would help them in the long run have a healthier relationship. Is this something that you did with your cats when you brought the kittens in, or how did you go about introducing Peach to them?
Yeah, so I think it really, I agree with all of it, and um all of what you just outlined is in Space Cat Academy's Home Sweet Home online course. And that's one of the motivations that I had in making that course is I think there's a lot of misinformation out there on how long it actually takes to properly acclimate cats to each other. It definitely it and there's always these set guidelines like, oh, it takes a week, or oh, it takes a few days, or oh, it takes this. It takes whatever time your cats need. So for us, it really honestly took about a month. Part of that was health quarantining, so they couldn't really be together. But I think that was to their benefit actually, because that during that month that they were in separate rooms, we started out when we first got them, they were only in our small bathroom. And it's a pretty easy to clean surface in there. Everything is, no carpet and, stuff like that. And so it was easy to clean. It got them to acclimate a little bit better. They could see each other under the door after when I allowed that to happen, and they got to smell each other that way. We did a bunch of scent swapping. And then when they were able to expand to the way our house is set up is there's a, bathroom that leads to a closet that leads to our office. And so we would just open those two doors, and all of that, or the kittens could have this whole half of the area to interact. And so they would play in our office, and then when I was ready I would put them back in the bedroom and let Peach come in and sniff the entire room where they were and got a lay of the land. And then we did a lot of playing. I put a gate up when I was comfortable with the idea that they weren't going to just get into it. And so I put a gate in the doorway, and then I would play with wand toys on either side or toss treats, whichever they were in the mood for. And there was hissing, and there was, posturing, and they weren't completely comfortable at first. And you just have to work through that. It's one of those things where you can't be completely put off, like, oh God, this is never going to work. They're hissing. Of course they're hissing. That's how they communicate their discomfort. And you should never, ever punish a cat for hissing, especially in this situation, because they're just conveying to the other cats and to you that they're uncomfortable. And so you might just need a shorter session between the cats. Keep it really short and sweet, maybe 2 minutes, let them play a little bit, and then put them where in a situation where they can't see each other anymore. And eventually, as they're comfortable, you can either add time to that, or you can get closer to each other. And I like to do it kind of like a ebb and flow of a wave. So get a little bit closer and then have them each go away from each other. Get a little bit closer and each go away. And what that does is it puts a little bit more pressure on when they're ready, and then it releases that pressure by having them move away from each other without anything bad happening. And eventually you spend more time closer, and then have them go away. And it teaches them that, look, nothing bad happened right there. You got to see them kind of close, smell them even more intensely closer up, and then we separate. And over the course of a month of that, they definitely, the hissing went down dramatically over that month. And then I would let them out. And this is the second most important part, I would say, is when you do decide, okay, they can be in the same room, I didn't just let them out, okay, you're getting along, now you're together full time. It was, okay, you're out for 5 minutes, you did well, let's go back to your separate room. Okay, you did really well this time. Okay, now Peach goes back to the room, and the kittens can explore the rest of the house. So I did a lot of swapping. And I just read an article about this from the IAABC journal, and I'll put that into the description as well, where in multi-cat households that isn't necessarily going as well as you had hoped, there's a rotation program that you can employ where the cats one can be out at a time, or a group can be out at a time, and then you switch them. And the goal over the course of that program is, again, to get them more comfortable with each other through scent swapping and through just moving spaces, so it doesn't necessarily become potentially a territorial thing either.
Yeah, that's all really great advice. I think one thing you kept hitting on that a lot of, us trainers know is this idea that you should always end a session on a positive note. And so it's a lot harder to kind of push the cats and have something, negative happen, a fight break out or anything like that, and to try to make that better or fix it than to just avoid it to begin with, end the session after 3 or 5 minutes, and then, let them see, oh, hey, I can be in this space with that other cat. Nothing bad happens. So next time they come back together, that's fresh in their mind, and they're going to more quickly recognize that this isn't a threat. So I think that that's something a lot of owners run into, just kind of this rush to, oh, they seem like they're doing fine. They've been fine for 5 minutes. I'm just going to leave the room and let them be now. But who knows what could happen even 30 seconds after you leave that room, something negative. So it really is something we always try to say. Always, if you see it's going well, congratulate everyone, give everyone rewards, and then separate them. And, hopefully next time it'll be the same. And again, this idea of shaping, for those who aren't familiar, is this idea that we don't expect the animal to just do the entire behavior all at once. We don't just expect them to just get along, but we can work up to that over time. So at first they can be, together, as Tori said, 3 minutes, then 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, then 15 minutes. And then eventually it's going to get to that point where you don't need to keep separating them. But again, like Tori said, it takes what it takes. You can't really rush it. Some cats are going to go through the process in a week. Some cats are going to take a month. Maybe some are going to take longer. So it really depends on the individuals in that pair that you're working with, and also what their prior experiences were. If they had a past experience that was negative with other cats, it's probably going to take a lot longer to build up that positive association.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great point to understand that, of course, each one has their own personalities. How did it go with your cats? Were there any specific things that you did differently because of Macy's blindness or anything like that?
Yeah, so we did very similar to what you described. The kittens were quarantined for much of their beginning here. So the other cats could smell and hear, their vocalizations, but they couldn't physically interact with them or anything. So I think that also helped them being able to just, know they were around but not have any interaction. Though not that it's been proven cats can display jealousy, but Bo did look a little jealous of the kittens at first. He was maybe a little grumpy and in a mood for a period of time, but he's gotten used to them. But
Sure.
with Macy, like you mentioned, it's hard because she's blind. And so one thing that I did was I actually would play kitten vocalizations. And I kind of talked about this last podcast with the enrichment, but I would just find on YouTube kittens crying and play it on my computer because I knew that Macy would really respond to that. So I put the kittens on my lap and had the laptop in front of me, and then had Macy on the bed next to me, and I just played the vocalizations, and she came right over and then started like smelling the kittens. And so it was like she knew because of the vocalizations something was there, and then she was more open to exploring it than if I just put the kitten in front of her and all of a sudden it's there and she smelled it and had no clue. So for some reason that worked for Macy. They're still not best friends, but there's not, aggression or anything. And actually, the other night, all four of them were on the bed with us sleeping, which doesn't happen all the time, but that was pretty cool.
And I think that's a good point to hit on, which is even when they're fully cohabitating with each other, they may not be the best of friends. They may never be the best of friends. It depends on their personalities. Especially because how old is Macy? Or I should say, how old was she when you introduced the kittens?
Well, she's 13 now, so she was around 11 then.
So she had gone, and she knows Bo, which is your other cat, but she had gone a while without having, kittens, especially in her life. And especially being blind, she's doing the best that she can with, the situation and having them all cuddle, being a special moment. But even just being with each other and, just walking around with each other and having no issues is something to be applauded for that situation. And I think for our perspective as a human, we want to kind of put our emotions onto these relationships between cats, and we want everybody to be good friends. We want them to act as a family. And it can take a lot of time. I've heard situations where it's taken multiple years of cats living together to even get within 3 feet of each other and be comfortable sleeping next to each other. And so it's one of those things where you just need to give it the time that it needs to flourish. So don't push relationships, take it as it goes. Some of them, I got really lucky that mine, and I think it's also because Peach is just such an affectionate cat, that she accepted them readily, after the month, of course. But now they kind of hang out together, play, and sleep together. Um, they definitely have their opinions sometimes of each other. But they're, I would say they're kind of an abnormality to be so close so soon. So definitely have patience when you're introducing, a new cat to the household.
Yeah, and that idea that we kind of sometimes push our expectations onto the cats, that's something that I've experienced when teaching the kitten training and socialization classes because, there's always going to be the kind of the star pupils where those cats just from day one, they are, not caring about this novel environment. They are running around, playing with toys, eating food, wanting to socialize. And then you have the other cats that maybe even after 6 classes still are just like wanting to sit there and watch, but maybe they went from sitting there and watching in their crate to sitting there and watching on top of a cat tower. And so to me, that's a really great progression for that individual cat. But for the owner, they want their cat to be like that cat that's, running all around and having a great time. And it's not that their cat, though, isn't having a great time and sitting on that cat tower, getting treats up there and watching what's going on. That might just be how that cat prefers to behave. And so I think that owners kind of need to adjust for their individual cats and also getting back to that idea of attachment security. If their cat is maybe a little more insecure, especially in novel environments, then, it's going to take them a lot longer to warm up, or they might not ever want to, personality wise, be that cat. So just kind of recognizing this is the progression we expect for that individual and really kind of celebrating when that individual hits milestones because even if an owner thinks that it's not much of an accomplishment to be out of the crate, to me that's a big accomplishment and they should really be excited about it as well.
So we've talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly of cat guardianship and how we can improve our lines of communication with our cats to improve the human cat relationship and also cat to cat relationships in this episode. So what are the ways that you do to embrace your cat as an individual? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And have you learned something of how you can employ these techniques to make it better for you and your cat to live more peacefully together? Let us know on our Instagram, CatSci Podcast, and we look forward to seeing you at our next episode. This episode was brought to you by MAOI's Cat Behavior and Space Cat Academy. Visit us online at maois.com and spacecatacademy.com.